many choices. Good morning, everyone. My coffee table is becoming a storage spot for gardening catalogs. It's that time of year when all the gardening catalogs mail and you get really excited and you're making enormous wish lists, and then you realize that there's no way that you're ever gonna get all of this stuff planted. It's really easy to get overwhelmed when you're flipping through these glossy, full color catalogs. I know the feeling, you just wanna plant everything. And that's okay. But as gardeners, we do need some tools and tricks to kind of wean down our wish lists. And one of the best ways to do this is to really learn how to read these gardening catalogs. Now, in my past life, I worked in the home seed packet industry. And one of the jobs that I did was actually putting together the catalog. So I was in charge of selecting products, making sure that all the information that people needed to make a decision was in the catalog, that everything made sense to the best of my ability. But you're up against not having enough space to include everything that you would really ideally want to put in there. So gardening catalogs use a lot of, you'll notice, like abbreviations and certain terminologies for the sake of fitting everything in the space that's available in that catalog. So what I want to talk to you today about is just how to decipher all of these words and codes and different things that you'll see in catalogs across the industry. And I think that will really help you make more educated choices about what you're selecting for your garden. So let's get started. The first thing to keep in mind when flipping through your seed catalogs is that the most important information, the information that the catalog wants to put right in front of your face, is always going to be on the front cover or the back cover, somewhere close to there, or perhaps on the order form. You'll see things like an offer. So Gurney's has this big coupon on their front cover. Burpee has a 20% offer on their back cover. Park does a free shipping on their front cover. But those things are going to be one of the first things that the company wants you to get your eyeballs on. Companies will also put important information for how to order, including shipping rates, shipping times, customer service contact information, and things like that in an easy to locate spot in the catalog. Usually that's on like an order form. So for instance, Territorial has their order form actually as part of the pages of the book, and that's toward the back of the catalog. Gurney and Burpee do something similar where they've got an order form stapled right into that center fold of the catalog. And those order forms, again, contain a lot of information about customer service, shipping rates, sales tax information, how to place an order, etc. Something I do recommend you look for right away, even before deciding to place your order, is the company's guarantee. Companies will put that information near the front or the back of the book. And a guarantee is basically what the company's policy on returns is. You'll see things like a no-risk guarantee, where this is Gurney's and they guarantee all of their products through the catalog for a year, no matter what. I think Johnny's and Territorial do something similar where they guarantee all their products. Park Seed has a product-specific guarantee. This is on the last page of the book, and basically this is saying that it depends on what the product is as to what the guarantee is. But the main thing is you want to make sure that the company offers some type of guarantee. I would just really recommend staying away from companies who don't make that guarantee information pretty obvious to you. You'll also see information about the Safe Seed Pledge near the front or the back of gardening catalogs. And the Safe Seed Pledge is just a statement that the catalog or the company does not knowingly buy or sell GMO seeds. And to my knowledge, all reputable companies within the gardening world at this point have signed this pledge. There are also no genetically modified varieties available to the home garden at this point. That may change in the future. So if keeping GMOs out of your garden is important to you, this is definitely something to look for. Keep in mind though that GMO and hybrid or F1 are not the same thing. A lot of companies offer hybrids. They are not genetically modified. And the last little snippet of useful information that is often contained at the front or the back of the book is a key to symbols or icons. So you'll see little symbols, icons, buttons used a lot throughout gardening catalogs. It's really just a space-saving device to get a lot of information to the person who is reading the catalog. So Territorial has a great example of this. They've got an extensive key to their symbols that they use, and that's everything from organic seed to new varieties to great for cutting and crafting. And then you'll see throughout the book that those little icons are used on the varieties themselves. Johnny's does something similar where they've got a key to their little icons at the bottom of each page. And then some companies like Gurney's are using really minimal amounts of buttons or icons. They've got their new buttons for the new varieties for the year, and then the only other one they're really using is this Gurney's Choice, which is basically their highest recommended variety of that category, and you'll see that used throughout the book. Now within the seed category of the catalog specifically, so that's vegetable seeds, annual flower seeds, herb seeds, there's a group of information specifically applying to that set of products that's important to recognize and learn about. The first bit of information is seed count, and this is going to tell you several different things. It will tell you how many seeds are in a packet or an order. It will also often tell you how many seeds can be found in a larger weight, say an ounce or a quarter of a pound. And you will almost always find this information at or towards the end of the copy block, so at the end of this text here. Gurney's, for example, has approximately 200 seeds per packet listed here, and then their offer size is a packet. You can also get a ½ pound or 2 pounds of that corn. This is Johnny's, and they've got their sizes listed here, so packet, ½ an ounce, ounce, so on. And then up in the copy block, they give you a measurement of 5,900 seeds per ounce. So then you can kind of figure out for yourself how many seeds are in each of these sizes that they offer. The other tidbit of information about seed count that some catalogs will give you is how many seeds it takes to sow a certain sized row. So for example, 500 seeds of something will sow on average 100-foot single-spaced row. Days to maturity is an important bit of information that trips some people up, especially beginner gardeners. And this is because the gardening industry is assuming that you understand the difference between something that is direct sown and transplanted. So you will see days to maturity listed for all annual vegetable seed products in catalog. And this corn, for example, says 78 days. Corn is a direct sown vegetable crop. So that 78 days means it's from the time that you plant the seed in the ground till the time that you are harvesting mature corn. And that same thing can be used for all direct sown crops, crops that go seed directly in the ground. And that's things like sweet corn, popcorn, cucumbers, melons, green beans, peas, all of your root crops like radishes, beets, parsnips, those types of things. It gets a little trickier when we get into non-direct sown items, transplanted items. Those are things that typically would be started indoors before it's warm enough to transplant. And then once the seedlings are about 6 to 8 weeks of age, they are transplanted out into either the garden or the container or wherever they are going to be grown to maturity. So that product group includes things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, broccoli, cabbage. And when you see that day to maturity on a, say on a tomato, for instance here, Gurney Girl's Best tomato, we've got 75 days. That is 75 days from the time that tomato transplant goes into the garden until you're harvesting ripe fruit. That number does not take into account the 6 to 8 weeks that it takes from the time that you start the seed indoors till you have a transplant-sized seedling. So always keep that in mind. So once you know the days to maturity of a certain variety, you can use that information to decide whether or not you can grow that specific variety in your own garden, your own growing climate at home. The way that you do this is that you'll want to figure out your last estimated frost date or danger of frost in the spring and your first estimated frost date in the fall. There are a lot of good resources online for figuring that. Garden.org and almanac.com both have a tool on their websites that you can actually just type in your zip code and it will pull up that information for you. Both of those websites are using database information that's pulling from the NOAA environmental information site, which collects weather and climate data from all over the place over a long period of time. But those are really easy to use. So just type in your zip code, it will pull up your first and last frost date. You can then figure out how many days you have between that span. So for example, I am in zone 6, kind of mid-western Ohio, and my first frost date in the fall is estimated at about October 6th. My last frost date in the spring is estimated at May 4th. That gives me 154 frost-free growing days. So I know that I'm safe to grow anything that falls below that 154-day threshold, which is pretty much everything. Catalogs will contain information to tell you whether a variety is open pollinated or hybrid. This information can usually be found with or after the variety name. So for example, this is a section of tomatoes in Johnny's catalog, and they are denoting hybrid with the F1 abbreviation, which is just an abbreviation that's indicating that this is a hybrid that is coming from a first generation cross of parents. And you can see here, these two tomatoes are F1s. These are not. These are in their heirloom category, so they are open pollinated. Other catalogs will actually group an entire section of hybrids together. So for example, in Gurney's here, this entire spread of tomatoes are all hybrids. So they're all grouped under this hybrid tomatoes header. Similarly, the next page is open pollinated heirloom tomatoes, and they are all listed under this header. Now, in general, if you see something listed as an heirloom, you can assume that it is open pollinated, because by definition, an heirloom is seed that has been passed down from generation to generation. You can't pass down seed if it is a hybrid. There are a few catalogs out there in the gardening industry that offer solely open pollinated and heirloom varieties. I believe Baker Creek does that. But for the most part, most any catalog that you pick up is going to sell a mix of both hybrid and open pollinated. And really, that becomes important if you are a person that plans on saving your own seed, because you cannot save hybrids, plant them, and have them come back true to type. You need open pollinated varieties for that. Also, if you're a person that likes hybrids because of that increased vigor and disease resistance and all of the other attributes that hybrids can offer, it's worth seeking out the varieties that are listed as F1 or hybrids in these catalogs. Additional information about seed will include things like whether the seed is organic, conventional, pelleted, treated. There's kind of a whole array of different ways that seed can be offered. Usually this is denoted with the variety itself in a catalog. Once in a while, you'll have a whole category where a certain group of seed has been given a particular treatment. A good example of that is in Gurney's. They've got a treated seed bit of information here for their entire corn category. Every variety of corn in this book has been, the seed has been treated. In Johnny's, they've actually got these indications with the individual varieties. So Cossack kohlrabi is a good example. They have several different options under that one. So you could buy Cossack as organic seed, you could buy it as conventional seed, and that's clearly listed here. Other books will offer, carrots is a good example. They'll offer just a regular conventional seed, and then they'll offer it as pelleted seed. Disease resistance and tolerance information is something that most catalogs will include with their varieties. And to be honest, this is something that I was guilty of not paying very much attention to when I first started gardening, because it's not fun and it's not exciting, but it is really important. And if you do one thing as it relates to disease resistance is just to do a quick, whether it's a search or talk to gardeners in your area, find out what the most prevalent diseases, pests, pathogens in your area are, and then look for varieties that have those resistances. That will go so far towards your ultimate gardening success. You can find disease information about the crops in the catalogs. With tomatoes in particular, a lot of companies have gone to this kind of like disease code because there's so many tomato diseases that are an issue for people. And you can see here on Gurney's, this is Southern Exposure Seeds. They have a similar one, but they've just basically got a key that has abbreviations for each tomato disease, and then under the individual varieties you'll see an abbreviation listed if that variety has that disease resistance or tolerance. Other catalogs may do it differently. I know Burpee just will list a variety resistance in the catalog copy. So this is Orange Wellington tomato. They've got tolerant to verticillium and fusarium wilts. Sweet corn genotypes is another tidbit of information to keep in mind when ordering. And this can throw especially beginner gardeners off because this isn't something that is talked a whole lot about when we talk about growing sweet corn. But it is important because it will let you know which varieties of sweet corn can be grown together and which you need to isolate. The different corn genotypes are designated by abbreviations. So you see SU, which is referred to as normal or sugary sweet corn, and that's kind of the type that we started off with years and years ago when sweet corn first came onto the market. SE is a sugary enhanced. It's kind of like a step above SU in terms of eating quality. And then we get into the SH2s and the SYs. SH2s you'll see referred to as super sweets, and SYs are synergistic sweet corns. And these again are another step up just in terms of sweetness and eating quality and texture and storage ability above the old SEs and SUs. Basically what those different genotypes are referring to is the combination of genes within a variety of corn which is lending it attributes such as sweetness and storage ability. So you'll first want to be familiar with the type of taste and texture and storage that you're looking for in a variety. The other thing, as I mentioned before, knowing the different genotypes lets you know which types can be planted together and which types need to be separated. So I still, for all these years of growing, can't keep it straight. I always have to go back and remind myself. This is an example. Sugary enhanced corns or SE corns need to be isolated from SH2s and SUs. And then all types, SEs, SUs, SH2s, SYs needs to be separated from field corn and from popcorn and from things like Indian corn or ornamental corn. And generally what we mean by separation or isolation is 300 feet distance in planting or about 3 weeks in maturity difference. And the other thing I want to mention about seed is germination testing. And while this is not usually explicitly talked about within the catalogs, it is something that all seed companies are required to do. So by federal standards, all seed is required to be tested at least once every 12 months. Really good companies will test sometimes as often as every 5 or 6 months. And basically what they're doing is they're sending lots of seed out, usually to an external company. Sometimes they'll do it internally, and just making sure that they're getting an optimal germination percentage from that batch of seeds. And the USDA has a whole set of standards, but reputable companies actually set their own internal standards, and that will often be much higher than what the USDA standards are for germination. A few other little tidbits that are not specific to seed include things like zone. Now, this is something that most catalogs will have USDA zone map somewhere in the catalog or on the website. And that's just a map that looks like this. You can find where you live. Your zone will be clearly marked. I'm in zone 6 here. And then any perennial plants throughout the catalog will list what zones they are appropriate for. So if I live in zone 6 and I'm looking at this really fantastic fig and it's only good for zones 7 and 8, I know I'm either gonna have to have like a greenhouse or some kind of shelter, or I'm just gonna have to forget about that variety. Not relevant really to your annual seeds, but if you're looking at anything like strawberries or asparagus or any perennial shrubs or trees or flowers, you're gonna wanna pay attention to zone. State restrictions are another bit of information that is more often applicable to perennial type crops versus the seed. State restrictions are usually due to either that crop is carrying some type of disease, that there is a concern about bringing that into the state and infecting the crops of that type that are already planted there, disease or pathogen or a pest or something like that. And then once in a while, it can be because that plant has been deemed an invasive in a certain state. And you can find that information once in a while in catalogs, but more often that can be found on websites. And that is because that information will change year to year. It'll change based on where the crop is being grown. There are a lot of switching variables there, but that is just something to keep in mind before you're ordering. And the last bit of information that's important is when you're looking at non-seed items, how to decipher the offer size, or basically how to figure out what you are going to receive if you place an order for that plant. And some of the most common that we as vegetable gardeners would be looking at potentially ordering are things like asparagus. So asparagus you will see offered as bare root, as crowns, as roots. I'm trying to think of all the different ways I've seen these described. Basically what you are going to end up with is this alien looking mass of sometimes very, very long roots with a little dormant growing point at the top. Potatoes are another crop that you will see offered most often as either whole seed potatoes, or within the last several years, some companies have gone to offering mini tubers. These are both essentially the potato itself, the whole potato. The difference is whole seed potatoes are large, like sometimes the size that you would buy from the grocery store and eat. And those you need to actually cut up so that you have sections that include one or more eyes, cure them, and then plant them. Mini tubers are like teeny tiny little baby potatoes that you plant whole and do not cut up. Sweet potatoes you'll see referred to as slips, plant, bare root. There's a lot of different terms that basically all mean the same thing. So sweet potato slips don't look like much. Maybe just a little stem with a few little hair-like roots, maybe some green foliage if you're lucky, but not always. And you'll usually get those in a bundle of, say, 55 plants. The catalog will typically denote how many you're going to receive. You'll get those, they'll just usually be in a cardboard box, maybe a little bit of like moss or packing material around the roots. If this is your first time ever ordering sweet potatoes, don't despair. Take those out. I usually just pop mine in a couple glasses of water, put the roots in some water till I'm ready to plant, which can be anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. They soak up that water, they revive themselves, you go out, you stick them in the ground, they just miraculously come back. Rhubarb you'll see offered as divisions, bare root, roots, crowns. Once in a while you can find it potted, and that's pretty obvious. That's a actively growing plant. Usually you'll see a few stalks, but the roots or the divisions just kind of look like a clump of roots. This is because typically how this is done is you'll have a big, like a mother plant. You will come in and just divide hunks of that main root. It'll be the root and it'll have 1 or 2 or 3 little buds or growing points on it, and that can be replanted and then will grow a new plant. Onions, in addition to seed, are typically sold as plants or sets. Again, with onions, like the sweet potatoes, you will get them in a group of like 55 to 75 plants. The catalog will denote how many you receive in an offer. Onion plants are produced from seed by the grower the same season that they're available for planting in the garden. Sets, you will receive little tiny dormant bulbs, usually like a bag of them, and those are produced from seed the year prior to being for sale. annual vegetable plants. But these are typically going to be things like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, sometimes broccoli and cabbage, and are often sold as either potted or plugs. And the pots are going to usually be around, you know, the like 2¼ inch size, with a seedling that's about that tall. A plug is going to be similar in size. A plug is just a plant that's been grown in a big tray, and then once the roots are fully developed, those plants are popped out. Sometimes they'll have like a papery wrapping around the outside. Strawberries you'll see listed for sale in spring catalogs as plants, bare root, sometimes crowns. Similar to the asparagus, they kind of have that alien looking tentacle kind of roots appearance when you get them. They'll have those roots, they'll have a little semi-dormant growing point or bud at the top. Once in a while you'll see a few green leaves, but not always. They don't look the most impressive when you receive them, but you soak those roots, you pop them in the garden, they always take off. They're extremely resilient. And then the last product group is just kind of the big umbrella term of bare root plants. And you'll see this in like trees, shrubs, fruit plants, perennial flowers, roses, all can be listed as bare root. And the important thing here when you're ordering these types of plants is to look for a term that's going to give you a little more description about what size or age those bare root plants are. So a lot of times in a good seed catalog or a good gardening catalog, you can find where it will say things like #1 bare root plant or 1 year bare root plant, or it will actually give like a measurement of say 12 to 18 inches. That 12 to 18 inches will be the size of top growth that that plant has when you receive it. That #1 bare root indication is a grading terminology that the industry uses, and #1 is the highest grade. So there you know you're getting a higher quality bare root plant. And then 1 year is obviously just, it's a bare root that has been grown for a year prior to you receiving it. I personally tend to stay away from companies that don't give any information as to the size or the age of their bare root plants, because a lot of times, especially if that price is really, really cheap, you'll end up with like a teeny tiny something or other that really has no root development and really has not a great chance of survival once it's transplanted. So that was a lot of information. Thanks for sticking with me through it. I sincerely hope that this helps you decipher the incredible amount of information that is packed into some of these gardening catalogs. And I'd love to hear from you. Is there anything else that you're seeing when you're ordering or planning your garden for the next year that you have questions about? Anything that doesn't make sense? Anything that you've ever wondered about? I would love to hear about those types of things. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.